I have to be honest, because I'm an organizer, yeah? This isn't just technical issues. There is a problem amongst academics and intellectuals not cooperating. I have to put my cards on the table. You know, here is a university academic, Zoom meeting one-to-one, no apology. I mean, Muslims need to really get their act sorted. It comes back to what I said. We have a disease. There is a Muslim disease. There's a massacre going on, and people are asleep. They're abdicating their responsibility. I'm sorry I have to say this. Another example. We can't just blame Zoom or technical faults. People aren't taking their responsibility, and they're going to be made accountable. That's what I'm worried about. Okay, enough of that. So he was meant to speak on messianic Zionist ideology from Jabotinsky to Netanyahu. That university is paid by Muslim taxpayers. And where is the Muslim intellectual? Disappeared, no apology. Okay, next on the agenda is Professor Haim. Haim Zabner. I met him on the internet. He's in London, top Israeli academic. He's written a book deconstructing the Israeli army. And I'm sure I haven't done justice to his background. So is Professor Haim Zabner there? Good grief. So it's not just a Muslim issue. Let me call him out again. We have invited Professor Haim Zabner, Research Associate at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies. He was on the WhatsApp group even yesterday. Are you there, sir? Second call. Because some of the, what do you call, names on his screen, I don't know who they are. Maybe he's late. I'll be patient. But there we go. You know, let the massacres go on. I need to drink my coffee. Okay. Next person is Dr. James Thring. Are you there, James?
I'm here, yes.
Yeah, you can hear and see me. Welcome to Dr. James Thring from the Ministry of Justice. He's our old-timer friend and activist from the Ministry of Justice from London. And he's been very active, can't criticize him, even if I dare. And he's prepared a lot of research, especially for today, on the terrorist sect in Palestine. He has prepared special papers in the past. So I'm very pleased that Dr. James Thring is joining us. So James, over to you. You can have a relaxed 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Moheen. Okay, the terrorist sect in Palestine. An abstract of this is recording the Zionist sect using terrorism to displace Palestinians and steal their land, while mislabeling Palestinian resistance as terrorist to turn global opinion against them. Instead, extreme state terrorism in Gaza incites global revulsion against the sect, leading the UN to call for a responsibility to protect action to save Palestine from annihilation. Israelis, largely Khazars, are a tribe terrorizing the Silk Road traders until 740 AD, when they converted to Judaism. Are not genetically Jewish, therefore. The breakout from the Gaza concentration camp by Qassam freedom fighters, not Hamas, to grab live hostages in 2023 was not to terrorize Israelis, as they claim. That was used as an excuse to cruelly clear Gaza, for which the Zionist leaders are incited for genocide by the ICJ and the ICC. Zionist founding aim at their conference 1897 was to disappear the Palestinians. So they intended it. Yet Israel, an apartheid state, deceives the world that Hamas, a democratically elected government, is a terrorist organization. Many examples of Israeli terrorism worldwide are cited, principally 9/11. Hebrews claim Yahweh promised them the Holy Land based on a divine covenant, but which they broke. Therefore, it did not grant them legitimacy to terrorize, steal, and mass murder. Palestine should return to indigenous governorship with compensation. Illegal immigrants can return to safe countries or the Jewish autonomous region granted by Stalin. Otherwise, more terrorist attacks on Iran with US complicity, will oblige Iran to counter with massive force, potentially helped by Russia and or China, hastening World War III. We can see who the terrorists really are. A definition of terrorism in the Oxford Dictionary is government by intimidation. I think that's rather feeble. The US Department of Defense, and now Department of War, of course, defines it more broadly as the calculated use or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate fear intended to coerce or intimidate governments or societies in the pursuit of goals that are generally political, religious, or ideological. This is the preferred definition because it's exactly what the Department of War and governments like Israel are actually guilty of. So a brief history of terrorism in Palestine. The terrorist sect in Palestine began with Zionist gangs, the Stern, Irgun, Haganah, and Zvi Leumi, or Lehi, terrifying local people from their homes with violent attacks on them, their property and animals from the 1920s. And the most well-known example is Deir Yassin in 1948, but there were many other places treated similarly. A few Palestinians resisted. British police tried to keep the peace. So the Zionist gangs also terrorized them and made us leave by bombing our HQ at the King David Hotel, killing nearly 100 people. Zionist terrorists even attacked British politicians. They sent a letter bomb to a British Prime Minister who opposed Zionism. They murdered Count Bernadotte, a pro-Jewish UN mediator, because he favored a Palestinian state. The Jewish lobby obliged the British army in Palestine to include a Jewish brigade, which aided the crushing of the Arab revolt in 1939. By sabotage, terrorist means, assassinations, blowing up supplies. Again, some Palestinians bravely resisted the invasion with arms, as is legitimate in law when defending one's own country against violent, lawless invaders. The PLO tried to draw attention to the plight of the Palestinians, not to terrorize anyone. They did terrify the Israelis, but that was not the intention. It was a result of the call for action. The Zionists always intended to take Palestine for themselves and to disappear the Palestinians, in inverted commas, as Herzl vowed in their 1897 conference in Basel. About 80% of Israelis are Khazars, descended from a barbaric tribe in Khazaria, the Ukraine, Black Sea, Caspian Sea region, which terrorized, robbed, and murdered traders on the Silk Road between Europe and China in the Middle Ages. To civilize them, Russia ordered them to adopt a religion. They chose Judaism in 740 AD. So they're not genetically Jewish. Moreover, they are probably most guilty of all the barbaric crimes against the Palestinians today. Muslim states like Iran, Iraq, and Egypt tried diplomatic deals to stop the killing and colonization, colonialism by the terrorist sect. The UN partition plan in 1947 aimed to placate both sides with a two-state solution. But the head of the Zionist Transfer Committee, Joseph Weitz, wrote in 1940, "There is no room for both peoples. The only solution is Eretz Israel, without Arabs. We must not leave a single village, a single tribe. A clear intent to genocide." The Oslo peace accords aimed to settle the conflict, but again the Israelis reneged on the agreement. They secretly conspired to avoid it in a document called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm. Fearing wars from neighbors, this plot was to destabilize Arab states by infiltrating agents provocateurs, i.e. terrorists, to stir up public revolt against their governments. George Soros funded the Arab Spring to boost this plan. Richard Pearl got US support for the strategy by compiling a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, to militarily occupy countries that were perceived as threats to America's interests, secretly meaning Israeli interests. To launch it, he envisaged the need for a cataclysmic event like a new Pearl Harbor. That was realized in the supreme false flag terrorist attack of 9/11. It also cast a fake blanket smear on pro-Palestinians, people, Muslim supporters, as terrorists. General Wesley Clark kindly revealed the 7 Muslim countries to be attacked, or militarily occupied, as they euphemistically put it: Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Sudan, which have all suffered catastrophically. 4 are now ruled by Israeli-supported terrorists. Other neighbors, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and most of the Gulf states, have been psychologically terrorized into kowtowing to the Zionist hegemon. We now have section 3, the use of deception to blame the victims and exonerate the culprits. The truth has been distorted by infamous slogans from Zionist leaders like Golda Meir and Chaim Weizmann, misrepresenting Palestine as a land without a people for a people without a land. Both are lies, of course. Historians like Phyllis Bennis claimed that Palestinians were not terrorized from their homes, but left voluntarily. Luckily, Jewish scholar Norman Finkelstein proved from British Army records that they were forced out by Jewish terrorism. Ex-Mossad agent Viktor Ostrovsky's blunt revelations in By Way of Deception also exposed Mossad's ruthless and terrifying covert assassinations and acts of sabotage. The orchestrated media often leads with Palestinian attacks and ignores prior attacks by Jewish settlers and the IDF, or the blockades and deprivations by the rogue state. Bent politicians, covert allegiances to the lobby, have voted for wars and policies for Israel against their own nation's interests, as exposed by Al Jazeera's film The Lobby and by Mearsheimer and Waltz's The Israeli Lobby, a very substantial investigation. US representatives at the UN veto every motion against Israeli terror and other crimes. The only democracy in the region, it's claimed by Israel, belies the fact that it's an apartheid dictatorship over nearly half the population. Political justifications include fake Holocaust stories, fake heritage, the Khazar tribe, fake anti-Semitism, usually anti-crime, anti-usury, anti-deception, all bringing fear of denigration or prosecution if denied or questioned. Bogus religious rites, another form of deception. In Old Testament fables and Talmudic anti-Gentile law, are vigorously asserted by many Jews and Christian Zionists. On the other side, Hamas challenges the myths and crimes of occupation. It was democratically elected to defend the people, to provide social services, and to dig shelters from Israeli bombs. Gaza is full of refugees from the Nakba, from widespread settler attacks, and from the IDF multiple mass terror bombings and blockades of the Strip since 2005, while Jewish terrorists blow up homes, poison wells, loot food lorries, and murder civilians and moderate leaders like Sheikh Yassin. General Sharon's massacre in Lebanon, where he stated, "We will cause maximal damage to life and property," was another arrogant state terrorism statement. Sharon also terrorized worshippers off the Al-Aqsa Mosque by marching into it to claim it, causing the Intifada. Inevitably, Hamas called for an end to Zionist occupation. The October 23 breakout from Gaza extermination camp was legitimate resistance to take hostages live, to peacefully trade for relief from blockades, attacks, and gradual genocide. It was not to threaten Israel, as they claimed. How could they, with no tanks, no fighter bombers, and no army? While the world is stunned into silence by this disproportionate state terrorism in Gaza, the state persists in backing violent extremist Jewish settlers in the West Bank, attacking Palestinian civilians, farmers, cattle, cars, supplies, water resources, generators, communications, and whatnot. This belligerent is supported by the IDF, which arrests the culprits, arrests the victims, not the culprits. It orders trial by one-eyed military courts, which imprison people, torture them, including children, on fake charges, a covert form of state terrorism. Netanyahu's deception at the UN General Assembly. Benjamin Netanyahu, son of Benzion Milaikowski, a Polish protege of Jabotinsky, who advocated starving Palestinians, changed his name to sound more Middle Eastern. He harangued the UN General Assembly in September 2025 this year, where nearly every sentence is a reversal of the truth, to fool the Assembly that the Muslims are terrorists while the Israelis are victims. Here are some excerpts. He said, "Iran means to threaten the USA and the world. A preposterous conspiracy theory. Iran has no record, no desire, no benefit, no means to make such threats." Then he said, "Hamas burned babies alive, raped women, and beheaded men, including grandmothers. This is patently a stream of lies because A, Hamas needed every hostage live when they took them, and B, because they have a higher moral code than the Israelis, who are guilty of raping and beheading prisoners, as an IDF soldier recently confessed." Then he said, "Hamas's charter calls for the murder of all Jews. No, it calls for Israel to be eliminated because of its theft of land, its apartheid dictatorship, and murder of indigenous people. That's not the same thing. This does not mean killing anybody. That can be achieved by closing it down and relocating Jews back to where they came from." Then he said the PA pays to kill Jews. Well, and the PA uses the same text as Hamas. This is rather unlikely because PA is subservient to Israel and would not have split from Hamas if that were true. He said, "Israel is feeding the people of Gaza with 2 million tons of aid." How kind of them. Not according to the International Red Cross or the PRCS and other aid agencies which actually provide it. And if true, the starvation witnessed by UN agencies would not be rampant as it is. He said, "Israel does everything to get civilians out of harm's way. Bombing residential blocks, even in the safe zones, and killing nearly 70,000 residents rather ridicules this deceptive claim. Dropping leaflets telling people to move who have no transport, no shelters to move to, is another cynical deception." He said, "Hamas steals the food, looting 85% of trucks to sell for arms. Unlikely for a local authority committed to its people's survival under Israeli bombing. And how would they get to an arms market under hermetic military dictatorship? Then Netanyahu said, giving Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York. Well, firstly, Palestine has been a governorate for centuries. Secondly, Al-Qaeda has no right to such a state in the US, but a recognized state would actually curb attacks to regain territory. And he said, it's not just me, the whole Knesset rules out a Palestinian state. Yes, but that's because it is packed with right-wing religious extremists who deceive the world that God gave them the Holy Land. A final quote, Iran and Israel are two ancient peoples. Yes, but Khazars like him are not of that heritage, and they give it a bad name. This is just a few examples of the Zionist sect lying, Hasbara, which further undermines anything he or they or the IDF say. Right. The global reach of Israeli terrorism. A more deceptive form of terrorism is that used by Israelis to terrify the rest of the world into abiding by Zionist dictates as to who are the terrorists, what is the definition of anti-Semitism, what is a Holocaust story, and which dictates that Islamic Jihad in general, plus Hamas and Hezbollah in particular, are a threat to security. The phantom of Palestinian terrorism has been conjured up by Israeli lobbyists funding misinformation to the orchestrated media. The PLO was targeted with the terrorist label when Israeli Olympic athletes were killed in crossfire. Yasser Arafat and others used terror events not to kill people, but to draw the world's attention to the plight of the Palestinians under Israeli occupation. It was interpreted as unruly terrorism, as malicious anti-Semitism, but it was a valid means of throwing off a deadly and lawless invasion of their country. They had no army, no resources, no effective legal force, and no sympathy or platform to support their rightful cause. Their very state is still denied by the invaders, despite UN recognition. Resistance is thus inevitable and legitimate in the face of overwhelming force and when justice is ineffective. This trick of demonizing the indigenous population was escalated into a plot to denigrate Islam in general. First, the Israeli lobby targeted the Islamic State group, claiming it was a threat to the Middle East in general and allegedly to the world, whereas ISIS was, of course, a rightful and legitimate organization to galvanize governments of Middle East nations into resisting Zionist expansion. Eretz Israel threatens to take over all the land from the Nile to the Euphrates, i.e. northern Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, part of Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And it now transpires extends to the Black Sea and Ukraine, the original homeland of the Khazars. Given Israeli devastation of Palestine and its persistent murder of Palestinians and the destruction of Palestinian farms, villages, and whole governorates like Gaza, this colonial plan is a terrifying existential threat to the region. More terrifying still is the Israeli lobby's hold over the USA and UK to use their immense firepower to destroy the defenses of major obstacles in their way. Saddam Hussein's Iraq was one. So a device to implement that war was to invent fake terror attacks by Iraqi forces on Kuwait, such as babies were being torn out of incubators in a Kuwaiti hospital, according to a video by Helen Knowlton. Luckily, the wife of the Jordanian ambassador to the USA recognized one of the nurses in the film, and it was exposed as contrived. Iran is the current victim of false accusations and terrifying US bombs. The Zionist lobbies have obviously penetrated China, but Chinese academics, although beset by Uyghur discontent are objectively analyzing the global threat with sympathy for the Islamic component, I believe. Terror attacks on the United States and other countries. The Zionist sect has been responsible for numerous terror attacks in Europe and other parts of the world. These have mostly been deceptively blamed on perceived enemies of Israel, usually Muslims. It terrorizes even the mildest of critics into silence. The most heinous example is the attack on New York and the Pentagon in 2001. Netanyahu exclaimed, "9/11 was good for Israel." His Mossad agents, the dancing Israelis, were ready to record it from a safe distance. He is a friend of the World Trade Center leaseholder, Larry Silverstein, who received over $2 billion from insuring the Twin Towers against such an attack. It also helped him clear the site for his planned redevelopment without the cost of first removing asbestos fireproofing, very expensive business. And he's a great friend of Israel, Rabbi Dov Zakheim, comptroller of the Pentagon, benefited from the destruction of the southwest wing of the Pentagon, where the Office of Naval Intelligence was investigating the disappearance of $2.4 trillion from the Pentagon budget under his watch. All were killed, all the investigators were killed, and their discoveries conveniently destroyed. The rabbi was also CEO of SPS, a company selling aircraft guidance equipment, which may explain how the planes were remotely steered into the Twin Towers, not by amateur terrorists, inverted commas, who could scarcely fly a trainer plane. Another friend leased Building 7 and called Pull It when it seemed like it was going to come down anyway, to add to the pile of rubble, despite its not being hit by any aircraft, proving it was pre-wired. Attacking its benefactor is the epitome of treachery. As Alan Hart asserted in his magnum opus, Zionism, the Real Enemy of the Jews, this will condemn the terrorist cult to ignominy and potential retribution, and the Jewish community should wish it to be removed from the pages of history, as President Ahmadinejad surmised. My final judgment: the Zionist project is doomed as immoral, violent, criminal, unjustified, and in the throes of a suicidal Samson option. Zionist leaders stand condemned for genocide by the ICJ and ICC. To end the terror, Netanyahu et al. Should be threatened, after trial by an international criminal tribunal, to be handed down sentences of incarceration with dwindling food, water, energy, and medicines, as he's perpetrated on the whole of Gaza. Given the state is proven guilty of genocide, of attacking New York and many other cities, of deceiving the USA and UK into attacking and devastating Iraq, of intending to extend its domination to Eretz Israel, most of the Middle East, of fabricating stories about the Holocaust, of plotting all along to remove the indigenous people of the Holy Land, of propagating lies about Iran's nuclear program leading to the US bomb attack, and of pretending to be God's chosen people. When all those lies are exposed, they should be condemned to oblivion and to compensate all the victims. There may be strong reaction, especially if Iran is attacked again, signaling the end times for the terrorist sect, leading, unfortunately, to World War III. All this could be avoided if the Judaic community reverted to the safer Jewish homeland granted by Stalin in 1928 in a Swiss-style land of plenty at Birobidzhan in eastern Russia. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. I've just, this is not my job, you know. I just phoned up the two other speakers. Our Israeli academic friend, it's from SOAS, associate, he has a broken car. Fair enough, you know, but people can text. You know, there's not kids here. It's not a classroom. You got media and political and academics here. You know, we're not using the technology. We really aren't. And that's fine with me. You know, someone has an accident. I can't complain, can I? We can't complain. But you got a text. The other guy from Malaysia, I was quite tough. I phoned him. He's asking me, when should I speak? So he is going to join us, Dr. Olsey. But again, we're not using technology. I mean, it's inexcusable. It really is. So Dr. Olsey is from the International Islamic University of Malaysia. I mean, you know, all these people aren't just names picked, you know. He has done deep research on Zionism from Jabotinsky to Netanyahu. It is a very important speech because we need to understand the monster. I make no excuses on that language that we're dealing with. You know, it's had 100 years of inception. So I'm wondering whether I should wait for him to join us or open up the discussion because that's two speakers. Indeed, the South African Imam, that might be a technical problem. He said he couldn't join. I said, New York joined, Nairobi joined. Can anyone make a suggestion? Shall we open up the discussion? You know, whilst we wait. Well, he has confirmed. Well, both speakers are interested, but you know, one's about to join. Okay, I'll have to use my what's the word?
Authority.
Yes, the liberty, if that's the word, liberty. Liberty's the only thing I think about, which is fair enough. Okay, let's open it up, even if it's for 5 minutes, and then we'll have a proper Q&A. So anyone who wants to speak, I know the basics of Zoom. Actually, we're meant to have, beg your pardon, on this session we got Dr. Thomas Daffern. Thomas, are you there? Go on unmute. Actually, the speakers come from Malaysia. Yeah. Let me see if it works. 1 second. Thomas, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Yes, it's just.
Yeah, I know you've been struggling. Yeah, we're trying to help you. Actually, things are getting back to order. We have got Professor Olsey. I don't know, this technology is really ridiculous. If you click it, it should open. So actually, Thomas, we don't need Q&A just now. You are the speaker, so let me introduce you. So we got now Dr. Thomas Daffern. He, you know, has a start. He was there right from the start. Some technical issues. He is the what do you call the director? Well, I can't honestly introduce him. He has so many what do you call hats, but one of the main ones here today is the director of the International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy, and there's many others. Feel free, by the way, Thomas, to introduce yourself properly, and he's going to look at solutions. You know, we're dealing with a monster. Let me just check my notes. He's going to speak on Towards an Interfaith Eschatology of Peace, the Solomon Option. Over to you, Thomas. Welcome.
Okay, right. Well, thank you very much, Moeen. I hope people can hear me. Can you just put
Yes, yeah, you're very clear.
Okay,
the screen here in this hotel, yeah, you're on the screen and you're on the Zoom screen, good. And your voice is good.
Right, so thank you. I'm dialing in from France here, 2.5 hours south of Paris, but I'm British-Canadian by origin. By way of introduction, this talk is in 3 or 4 parts. The first bit will be a kind of summary of my research and why I'm interested in speaking at this conference. I take a slightly different perspective to maybe some of the other speakers. I've been studying this stuff for 30 years as an academic. So my talk will be mainly as an academic historian with a specific interest in intellectual history and peace studies. So I was born in Canada, actually, in the 1950s, but raised in the UK in Sussex, studied philosophy at the University of Bristol, and then back to Canada for a very, very detailed 4-year study period in world philosophy and religions. I found the way philosophy was taught in the UK very narrow. I was very interested in world philosophy. I did a history degree at the University of London from 85 to 88, and I studied political philosophy and the history of European ideas and world history. I was specialising in the history of East-West relations, the Cold War. James, what's your hand doing up?
Excuse me, I can't hear you terribly well. Could you turn the volume up, or is it my end that's the problem?
I can't turn any volume.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Sorry about that. It must be something. Maybe click on your end.
Yes, it might be.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it though.
So I was, interested in East-West philosophy, the history of Marxism in Russia, and the history of liberalism and thought in Western Europe, and how we could end the Cold War. So my first interest in peace was focused on the Cold War, and that became my doctoral thesis. I was also interested in the World Federalist Association, and was a member of the committee in London, and I organised meetings in Parliament. My PhD on the history of the search for peace from 1945 to 2001 was at the University of London, and a very, very detailed study. I travelled to about 35 countries around the world looking at how peace is taught. What can we do? So, and I was elected coordinator of Philosophers for Peace in Moscow in 1990. So that dates me. So I've been at this for a very long time. And in 1991, I set up the International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy at the University of London. So, and I've been running that ever since, which organised seminars in Parliament, and mostly in the House of Lords, from 1993 to 2008, looking at peace and ethics and interfaith spirituality. So, simultaneously, I was elected coordinator of the World Conference on Religions for Peace. So we are the main interfaith peace group around the world, and that's taken me to many conferences, including in the Vatican in '95, working for interfaith peacemaking. So that's why I'm talking about interfaith peace in this talk. What I argued for was the UK and London should have an Institute of Peace Studies or Peace Research similar to that in Stockholm and other European capitals, and I still want that to come into being. My PhD was examined and passed in 2008 finally. It took a very long time because the work was so intense, but also I encountered a resistance to the concept of peace among fellow academics. In the UK, they're much more interested in war studies. And I was trying to get the UK intellectual establishment to take peace seriously, hence the meetings in Parliament. Why aren't there more professors at this conference? Why don't we take the problems of this tragedy that's been happening in Israel, Palestine, Gaza more seriously? To me, it's a disgrace. So also at the same time, I trained as a secondary school teacher and worked as a head of religious studies and philosophy in the UK education system, it's very important to teach younger minds as well as older minds, because they're very flexible. They have all the intelligence of youth, and I found that a fascinating experience for 10 years. So let me jump forward to say that in my in my studies, I went also to Israel and Palestine and set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East in about 2008. I taught at the Muslim College in London, and was a friend of Dr. Zaki Badawi. I got very interested in comparative Islamic Christian Jewish philosophy. I spoke at the Ibn Arabi Society, and I set up the Commonwealth Interfaith Network in '97 as a Canadian, peace thinker. Met the head of the Commonwealth then, an African, Chief Anya Uku, who said, yes, we need one, and there isn't one. And so I'd gone to the Commonwealth Interfaith celebration in Westminster Abbey, which is what, it gave me the idea. I said, what is the Commonwealth doing? 53 nations, including all different faiths. Why aren't we doing more for interfaith peace work? So that was the job that I took on. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East was the idea, not just for Israel Palestine to sort out their problems, but the entire region. As I've been to Turkey several times and spoken there. More recently, I've always proposed and supported a two-state solution. I've spoken about this in Israel and Palestine. I've met leaders in both countries. And watched with horror, really, as I think America particularly, and people spoke about the influence of Zionism in America, has sort of failed its moral duty of leadership to actually bring about proper discourse and dialogue between all the factions, which is what I've been trying to do. When Trump and Netanyahu issued their peace plan, if you recall, a few years ago, I did a detailed critique of it. I wrote a comment on the text and published it. And I said, look, most of this is not acceptable. It's ridiculous. The fact they didn't even invite Palestinians to the talks, right? Absurd. This was Kushner and Trump. But at least it was something on the table. And there were some good ideas like, a decent port in Gaza, a railway connection between Gaza and the West Bank, and an airport for East Jerusalem. There were some good ideas in it. So I sort of gave them the benefit of the doubt and wrote I marked their paper. It was a fail, but I said, some good ideas, try harder. Unfortunately, it was just binned. I think the Islamic leadership failed at this point. There was a ceremonial putting of it in the bin. And of course, Hamas was already planning its violent actions, which has led to the utter destruction of Gaza in front of our eyes. There's a turning point there where we could have taken a different route, I think. I was elected coordinator of the World Intellectual Forum, which I still hold, and our job is to try and, get the intellectuals of the Middle East to talk to each other. Now, that means actually talking between senior Palestinian and Jewish and Israeli, thought leaders. And that is still our work. So that's why I'm here speaking at this forum. It's got similar aims. As a scholar, what I've been doing in the last decade is working on a very detailed comment on the faith scriptures, particularly of the three main faiths here. So I've done commentary on the four Gospels in enormous detail as a scholar of religions, but also on the entire Quran, drawing on my knowledge of Quranic studies and Islam. And I've done, I think, the most comprehensive 10-volume commentary on the Quran by an English-speaking academic that's ever been attempted, actually. At the moment, somebody needs to mute. It's the same problem Matt had. My methodology is what I call transpersonal history, which is to look at history from the transpersonal level, which is a phrase coined by Carl Jung, the great psychologist, who was a healer. My approach to this problem is as a medical healer in the conflict of ideas that's going on. I'm not here to win arguments, to beat people up, to accuse people, or to sentence them and so on. I'm here to heal. I think we have two traumatized peoples. The Israelis, were a traumatized people after the Holocaust and the centuries of pogroms and all the rest of it. And the Palestinians are meta-traumatized now. So we have we have to apply our medical approach. And to me, philosophy is about healing. Okay, I want to move on. That's the sort of how I got to be here addressing you. I want to... the talk is billed as towards an interfaith eschatology of peace. So I want to first focus on what I mean by interfaith, because different people have different interpretations of this. When I worked at senior levels in the interfaith community, Religions to Peace, I met experts from all different countries. Some people think interfaith should be restricted to talks between the big religions, so-called, and would limit it and say, no, it's just the big five religions or whatever. I take a very different view as a global philosopher. And if my camera was working, I would show you my periodic table of the world's religions and philosophies, which I produced. Unfortunately, my camera's not working. You can look at it on my website, however. I'll put the thing in chat later. And there's 162 boxes. It's the first attempt, like a Mendeleev periodic table of the physical elements, to produce a periodic table of the religious and philosophical traditions for humanity. It's a teaching tool for university and school use. And it divides the world's philosophical and religious systems into, firstly, the primal or pagan religions, green boxes, the Buddhist traditions, a dark red, Chinese, which is Taoism, Confucianism, and so on. Judaism in all its different shades and forms, Samaritan, Karaite, Orthodox, Reformed, Conservative, the Kabbalah, and so on. They all have their own lineages and followers, and in the table you can see how many in each box. Then you've got all the different varieties of Christianity. There's about 30 enunciated: Protestant, Humanist, Christians, Baptists, Presbyterians, Roman Catholics, Coptic, Ethiopian, Rosicrucian, Gnostic as well, which is a valid tradition within Christianity. The Quakers, all listed. And likewise the humanist tradition, so that would include the atheist, agnostic traditions, the Hindus, various forms of Islam. They're all enunciated with all the details: Jainism, Shintoism, new religious movements, which is a whole field that scholars like me like to study, Sikhism. Also, there's a series of boxes for esoteric thought, things like Freemasonry, which are not normally analysed or studied. But I'm saying, as a global philosopher, these are all in the game. We have to understand what's going on here. Then there's the Persian religions: Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, Manichaeanism, etc. We have Sikhism, and then we have philosophy pure, things like Platonism, Aristotelianism, Hegelianism, Kantianism. They're all listed with their own boxes, as well as the scientific traditions, who see philosophy as, well, biology or mathematical theory, information technology, physics, chemistry, etc. They're all there. So this is it's a very innovative teaching tool, which I want to say this is what interfaith stuff means. It's not just a few people, who belong to one of the four clubs. No, this is genuine discourse between the world's great and diverse and complex philosophical and religious systems on the planet. And so that's what I mean by an interfaith peace eschatology. How on earth can we get peace between all these rival different systems, some of which are covert? They're operating behind the scenes, they're not known about. I ferreted them out, like our speaker, Matt. I've done this research for 30 years, Matt. So I agree with some of what he says, but I don't agree with some of the thrust of what he was saying, and that can come out in Q&A. One of my main things is that science and religion both have to cooperate to solve these problems. We can't sort of demonize the scientific world. No, we need to work with scientists to unpick their own eschatologies. Okay, so that's what I mean by interfaith. It's a very, very broad approach. The second point I want to do is define eschatology. What do I mean? What do we mean by eschatology? So in the field of comparative philosophy, it's the study of the purpose, the end to which we're working. Now, it has micro eschatology as your own soul journey. What happens to you when you die? That's the field of eschatology. But collectively, it means what happens to humanity. Where are we going? What's the future we want to build together? And this involves the study of all different religions and philosophical systems that I've explained. What are their views on the future? One way of talking about this is future studies, which is a branch of peace studies. And there's a chap called Shlomo Soman, an Israeli academic, who's written a book called Future Intelligence. We need to understand how we can reconceptualize a peaceful future if humanity is going to have any hope. We have to get our future intelligence thinking. So that's what I call peace intelligence. Too many people argue that eschatology implies violence. And, one of the speakers rightly said, no, this is a false idea. The true eschatology that we need to build together is a peaceful one, not a violent one. So the question then before us is, how can we co-build as intellectuals, as religious thinkers, as scientists, a non-violent world? Well, okay, we've got blueprints. We can look at the work of Gandhi. We can look at the work of the Sufis. We can look at the Jains and the Buddhists and the yogis. And they've been talking about non-violence for millennia. It's there from the Upanishads on. And in my commentary on the Quran, I've teased out the Quran is an incredible blueprint for a non-violent world. The surrender of the ego to the absolute, which is what Islam actually means, is the blueprint process of how we get peace. It's there also in the Christian scriptures. If you read my commentaries on the Gospels, I mean, Jesus was a teacher of non-violence. He came to teach love. And it's there in the greatest of the prophets within the Jewish tradition. So I think we have all the texts to create a non-violent eschatology for mankind. The trouble is we also have these violent eschatological ideologies that are rampant around the planet, such as militant Zionism, which is a sort of violent ethno-nationalism. It's our little nation is going to terrorize and defeat everyone else because we've got the blueprint, of how to get online to God. And everyone has their own version of that. We have these American MAGA movement is again part of this ethno-nationalist self-promotion. It's a kind of narcissism. And I see that Trump has been diagnosed with malignant narcissistic personality. I don't think we can just blame Trump. It's that entire...
Thomas, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Someone's interrupting the conference. James, can you unmute? Can you mute yourself, please? I think you're the only one on the screen. Anyone else who is not muted, please mute.
Thank you. There's been a lot of noise.
Yes, it's the house rules, because not everyone understands them. Can everyone who is not speaking mute themselves? I know this is a very powerful tool. People need to understand the rules.
Sure.
Okay, carry on. Be relaxed. Carry on, Thomas. Carry on.
Okay. So yes, I mean, I think all cultures have gone through this phase of self-promotion, violent ethno-nationalism. We had it from Japan with the whole World War II, sort of neo-fascist stuff. China's done it as well. Islam had its own period. I mean, if you look at what the Ottomans tried to conquer Vienna, and in the name of their own version of sort of we're the best people, we're going to conquer everyone else. So one of the things that we have to do to create a non-violent peace eschatology is to deconstruct these violent eschatologies, which all have a sort of plot line like ours is the best, we're going to conquer everyone else. Well, that's what we have to grow out of. And Zionism is, in effect, one of the worst and most pernicious of those. We have to grow out of it. I have many Israeli friends that want us to grow out of it and are doing their best as intellectuals to outthink Zionism. Now, and that includes, by the way, I want to include the secular, the socialist tradition. I live in the middle of France, where Pierre Leroux coined the word socialism in France. He meant, in his epic book on humanity in French, which I've read, that we've reached a period in the world's history where we as a whole humanity need to grow up and discover our collective genius, our collective wisdom. He believed that hitherto we've been promoting our own religions, our own ethnicities. Now we have, as humanity, to stand together whatever our class, whatever our culture, our race or religion, and find our collective wisdom. That's what he meant by the word socialism. And it had an eschatology of itself. He believed that through that we would find peace. He was inspired by Saint-Simon, the great French pioneer of these thoughts. So, and from that, he was an opponent, by the way, of Karl Marx. He felt Marx had failed to understand the spiritual side of human nature. You can't build communism, said Leroux to Marx, from a purely materialist philosophy. It's not a science. It has to include spirituality, the arts, philosophy, and so on. I agree with Leroux. So how can we all do that? That's the challenge ahead of us here. Well, one way we can do it is through an actual treaty for interfaith peace. Because, you know, as a scholar of war studies and peace studies, how do wars end? They all end with a peace treaty. When they end, some just go on forever. Eventually, we will get a peace treaty between Israel and Palestine. Eventually, we will get one between the different rival factions, Ukraine, Russia. They are going to have to sign a peace treaty if the wars are going to end. So I've called for an interfaith peace treaty. And I've drafted it, I've written it, it's got its website, and everyone on this call or who listens to these talks later is welcome to personally sign, either on their own behalf or on behalf of a faith group, if you are a rabbi, an imam, or whatever. Sign it on behalf of that group. I'm calling for millions of people to sign this interfaith peace treaty. And that would be us rising up against the the elite power holders in all these faith traditions who benefit from maintaining the conflict. So, for instance, in the tragic Irish conflict, the terrorist groups who were fighting away on the streets of Belfast actually, in a sense, perversely benefited from the conflict. They were getting money, they were getting funding. In a sense, there's an inbuilt support from the elites. And this happens it's going on in Sudan, it goes on in Israel-Palestine even. Well, we the people need to rise up against them all, whatever our religion. And one tool I've created is this Interfaith Peace Treaty, which I'll put the link in chat later. If we can do that, if we can sign it, but not just sign it physically, but sign it spiritually, read the text. It's 56 paragraphs. It's complicated. People say, Thomas, why is it so complicated? I say, well, hang on. When you buy a car, you have to sign a 10-page legal document. When you buy a house, it's a 20-page legal document. This is a document to end interfaith wars forever on this planet. It's only 45 paragraphs long, and yet, so actually, take the time to read it carefully and then affix your name, please, if we're going to do this. If we do that, that's what I call activating the Solomon option. Somebody mentioned earlier, James, about the Samson option, which is we kill everyone, we bring everyone down, we destroy the planet, we have a third world nuclear war, everyone loses, game over. Yeah, that's the Samson option. Ridiculous. I'm not for that. I'm for the Solomon option, who was the king of wisdom and who's revered and respected by Islam. There are many verses in the Quran about him. He's respected in Christianity. Jesus always taught about him with respect. And in Judaism, he is the wisest king Israel ever had. God, we need him back, guys. So that's why I'm saying let's reactivate the Solomon option. Get this Interfaith Peace Treaty signed, discussed, get it signed by all the faith leaders and the faith followers, most importantly. And then we can activate the wisdom element, because Solomon was the king of wisdom. That's what we need here. We have to learn to settle our differences through activating that transcendental option. This is what I call transpersonal history. This is about what we do when we've buried the ego, when we become a surrendered soul. Whether you call yourself a Muslim or a Sufi or a Catholic, or it doesn't matter. It's the question of how your actual soul sits in relation to the absolute. And if we surrender, that's activating the Solomon option, all of us. And so I think this is my gift to this conference is let's activate that Solomon option. how do we do that? What follows? Well, geopolitically, I think we need agencies and instruments to manifest that will to non-violence that I think the vast majority of people on this planet feel. I'm not talking nonsense to people. No, it's the world media won't carry the peace message. It won't carry the message of non-violence. I've been to 10 conferences in India with Jain leaders, Buddhist leaders, Hindus. Non-violence is at the core of that message. So I've called for the European Peace Agency to be created, parallel to the European Space Agency, which would be a technically competent body of professional mediators, conflict resolution people, experts in peacemaking. And we're hoping the Irish government will propose this when it's leading the European Union. Because what we've seen in the last few years, the failure of our political leaders to actually resolve these conflicts, dragging on in Ukraine and Russia, millions dying we've seen it in Gaza. The reason it's happening is because we cannot trust our political elites to solve these conflicts. They're benefiting from them. They get the kudos, the money, the status, go around the world, for supposed ceasefire negotiations that are going nowhere. So we need a technical proficient body, and that's what the European Peace Agency will be, staffed by specialists who will deliver actual ceasefire, truce, peace negotiations, and mediate the causes along the lines of what I've been talking about. So anyway, those are some thoughts about how we can get to a solution here, because the times are, difficult, and I'm thinking of those poor Palestinian kids in Gaza in tents, freezing to death. Children have been dying in the last week. I mean, this is a scandal for humanity. And we, as intellectuals, we shouldn't be on this call unless we're prepared to give everything towards this cause of peace. I am. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I know many other people. I honour you all, and Moeen, you've been really brilliant at this. Keep it up, and let's do this together. Okay, thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. Can you hear me, Thomas?
Yes, I can. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, just because I'm getting my thoughts together, getting rid of all these little technical hiccups. So Dr. Thomas Daffern there made a huge contribution. I remember my dealings with the European Space Agency and Dr. Badawi on some sort of technology and content model. But yes, just to recap what he said, he mentioned the need for the Solomon option, an interfaith peace treaty, if I recall correctly, and an agency.